Today we're looking at the Constitution and how it came about. And you can't do that without starting with the Articles of Confederation, the first system of government by which the country ran. And the Articles of Confederation actually operated and were the form of government throughout the Revolution. So, one for its plus is that it got the United States to becoming the United States and guiding the country through the Revolution. But afterwards, it's really going to face a lot of challenges, and its weaknesses are going to overwhelm its positives. So we'll get started with the slideshow and looking at the second one where we get into some of the details of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. You've got to keep in mind that these are designed as a weak confederation to bring the states together, but only marginally. Remember, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of desire to get away from what had been going on in England and that relationship that England had with America, with a king and a parliament that was overwhelming. All right, so the idea of making weak central governments with more powerful local governments was the move at that time. And that's effective in some ways, but in terms of operating a country as they find out, it's not going to be that helpful. So what some of the elements are explained with that graphic there explaining those weaknesses. One of them being that each state had a vote, one vote, okay, regardless of how many citizens they had. So everybody just had one vote. All right, Georgia was teeny tiny, Virginia was large, and each had one vote. All right, you also only had a legislative branch, a Congress, making laws, but you didn't have an empowered executive branch to carry those out. You didn't have a judicial branch to interpret those laws. You didn't have a trade agreement or the ability to regulate foreign trade, which meant every country essentially every state served as its own country when dealing with trade with other countries. Very slow, very awkward, and not efficient at all. In addition, passing laws needed 9 votes, not just a majority, and amending the articles required a unanimous vote, something that is pretty hard to do. All right, so a lot of weaknesses going on here. We'll go to the next slide, and we'll contrast that with the strengths. The strengths are under this Confederation Congress, they're going to pass 2 very important laws. One, the Land Ordinance of 1785, and the second, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. What the Land Ordinance is going to do is establish a plan for how to deal with land out west of the Appalachians. Now that the Revolution is over, America, the United States, is in control of all the land going up to the Mississippi River. And while that area between the Appalachians and the Mississippi was sparsely populated with colonists before, more are going to start moving out there. And the United States would like to encourage them to do so, but they don't want it to be a free-for-all. So what they're going to do is use it as an opportunity to make money for the federal government and bring people out in an orderly way. And what the Land Ordinance does is sets up those rules and parameters. It's going to set off square mile blocks to sell to people that they can then purchase and move on to and become farmers or whatever else. In these townships that they create, they're also going to set aside land for churches and for public schools. So being really ahead of its time in that way. All right, going on to the next slide. Now the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 is going to set up the rules for future territories to become states. As more and more people are going to move into these regions, it's going to be necessary to have governments. And so there are temporarily territory governments, but they would like to be able to join those original 13 states. And so what the Northwest Ordinance does is it establishes rules and population lines that you must reach in order to be able to apply for statehood. This is how, and through this law, this is how the states that now make up the Midwest are going to make their way into the Union as states. Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota are shown in the picture here. Okay, this was known as the Old Northwest because at the time, that's the Northwest of the United States. We now call it the Midwest. But this is the time following 1787 that these areas will go from being territories to gradually making their way to become states over the next 50 or some odd years. All right, to the next slide. Well, getting back to some of the negatives. Well, the Articles of Confederation, because there was no federal power to tax people, caused a big issue. They couldn't raise money. The only money they got were off land sales, and that's not enough to pay for what the war cost. Well, that left the states in a situation where they had to foot the bill. And so in some states where a lot of the fighting took place, it was a very expensive bill, and they turned around and they taxed the citizens at high levels. Massachusetts was an example of that. A lot of the war happened there, so a lot of the taxes in Massachusetts are going to be very high. Well, one person is going to take this into his own hands, and that's Daniel Shays. He's a farmer. He fought in the Revolution, and he feels like the fact that his taxes are so high that he can't afford to pay for his farm anymore are just outrageous. So instead of just taking it lying down, he and his other people who were affected by this are going to get together, get their pitchforks, their guns, and their torches, and they're going to say, we're not standing for this. We will not do this. So they go and they start taking over a bunch of the courthouses, because in the courthouses, that's where the ruling and the judgment for foreclosure on their farms is taking place. And they figure if they take those over, they can't do this. Well, this has amounted to lawlessness, all right? And unfortunately for the state of Massachusetts, they don't have the ability to put this down. So this is going to continue to rage on. And the federal government's standing there like, we can't do anything really about it. So this is a moment of weakness until finally the revolution or the rebellion that he has started is going to finally fizzle. But it definitely shows that the federal government was really ineffective and was not able to put this thing down. And so they weren't really able to back up the states. They're not really able to hold their own water. And so it has become quite evident to a lot of people that this system of the Articles of Confederation isn't working and won't work going forward. All right, we'll go on to the last slide that we'll do right now. So there's a meeting is going to be called to meet in Philadelphia to join to amend or fix the Articles of Confederation. Well, when we get there, it's kind of a surprise. That's not really the plan, because James Madison from Virginia is going to show up with his own plan of government and say, in fact, we got to scrap the Articles. I got a better plan. It's the Constitution, and it's going to create 3 branches, and I'll tell you more about that. And we'll pick that up next time.